Hello, everyone. Here we are, starting out our brand new show with technical difficulties. Always ready to make a great first impression. Hi. Hi. My name is Josh Foreman. I'm having technical difficulties. Please stand by. Alright, my camera's just going to be mad at me now. That's the point at which you just turn it off, turn it back on. Alright, how are we doing? I have been Twitch streaming for years and years now. You'd think I'd have a handle on it at this point. But, you know, you change one thing, one little thing, and the whole world just blows up. Alright, we're going to full unplug everything on the camera. Alright. Give it another go. How are all y'all doing? I'm doing great, except for this this technical hiccup. I just realized I closed down the stream, and I don't see chat on my OBS, which makes it hard to interact with anyone, doesn't it? All right. Where are we at now, camera? We're in the one moment, please loop. Okay, I'm gonna go into my... like, literally, everything was set up, working perfectly. Two dry run tests to make sure this would work. All right, we are deactivating you. We are reactivating you. Hey, look at that. We have art. Congratulations. All right, what a graceful introduction that was. We're going to start over. My name is Josh Foreman, and I do art and stuff. So I thought I'd introduce a little bit of my background here, the kind of work that I do, which is everything, a little bit of everything, just enough so that I can't get like really good at any one particular thing, but enough that I'm always entertaining myself. So I'm gonna scan through the chat real quick just to make sure that nothing is like on fire or ridiculous at this point. Yes, turning it back on, off and on was the trick. Cool. Okay. Right. So, yeah. Okay. Here's one type of thing that I do. This is the head. I have the rest of the body disassembled in my studio. This is a Colossus from Shadow of the Colossus, which I built by hand completely, with the small exception of my little Wander character here, who I sculpted in ZBrush and 3D printed. So yeah, that's just an example of some of the stuff that I do. And it helps provide a little bit of context for what we're going to be working on today. So I figured, as a start, we could do a little sort of a cooking show style format for this first one, just because, you know, I'm able to just prep it to begin with and, you know, just go through, because I need to make 1 metric buttload of these pillars, because I'm making a massive diorama that is going to, that the Colossus, which is about 4 feet tall, is going to sit inside of, and for the big photo shoot. I have a 35-part series on my YouTube channel. As far as I know, I'm the only person who's ever done this. I shot every second of the construction of this thing, all 1,000+ hours. And so over the past couple years, I've been slowly editing. I say slowly. I've been in a panic editing all of this footage into a massive series, and I don't cut out anything. I show the entire process start to finish. I do a lot of fast forward, obviously. Yeah, so for the final episode, I want to have him like just in the most beautiful shot imaginable. I'm putting him in the environment from the game that he's in. And so that involves basically building a room around him. Let me see if I have the reference shots. I had them. I'm always referring to them. But you know that thing when you, yeah, again, getting back to this, to the theme for the day, which is the second you change one thing, suddenly everything gets thrown off kilter. So here is the Colossus in his environment, which is kind of a big underground, cavernous, ruined arena type of thing. And the walls are covered with this series of like shelves and pillars, more or less. And so that's what I'm doing. I cut a whole bunch of these. I made a jig, and I used a hot wire foam cutter, McFeely, to cut these out. And now I'm going to go through the process of taking it from kind of this raw cutout form into something that's painted and ready to be stuck on the wall. You think the Flying Colossus is the best Colossus? It's really hard for me to choose. It's one of my favorite games, and I find value in almost all of them. You saw the first 3 parts of this years ago. Yeah, it has taken years and years and years. I do everything very slowly. I have a day job, which is working on video games, and that's probably kind of notable as well. So I have a lot of experience building environments virtually, and kind of as a hobby, I build them in physical space as well. So sometimes those skills transfer back and forth really well. Sometimes they don't. It'd be really nice to just apply a bump map to my raw foam and not have to go through all the process of carving and stuff, but hey, no spoilers, Valandar, the red. Now everyone's gonna know. Okay, cool. So let's get started. I am actually also in the process of wrapping up my latest video, which is about how to make all of these different stone textures with foam. And so I've kind of been, well, I systematized the process, wrote down everything, have it all recorded, and now I kind of have this more organized library in my head of techniques and tools to use to get the effects that I want on these on my pillars. And I dropped one of my cool rocks, and rip, it's gone forever. Rip rock. So here's the tools that I'm going to be using today. If you can call a wadded ball of foil a tool, and you can, and I do. Yes, Reaper Joan. Agra! Agra! Yeah, working on video games is often very cool, and often incredibly taxing. Let's put it that way. Cool, so one of the things, because I made my own jig, it's a little wonky. It's not like those cool ones you can get from Shifting Lands that are like laser cut and precise. So the first thing I do when I'm getting ready to carve this is I have to clean it up because, let me show you. You put it in a jig like, here we go. Here's the jig that I built. And I just cut this out with a jigsaw. I had these two pieces together. The problem is that without like laser sights or whatever, it's almost impossible to visually eyeball the, what would that be called? These have to be at exactly the same angle. And if they're off by a little bit, one way or the other, then you're gonna get a slightly tilted, you can see how the line's like going up like that and such. Yeah, so it gets tricky. It slides in like so, and then you just run the hot wire over it, and then you pop it out, rotate it, do it again. You could also use just a traditional knife if you're a masochist. One of the nice things about foam is that you don't really need a hot wire tool, especially if you're doing, a few things here and there. If you're going to do a lot of it, I highly recommend it. But. All right, so we're going to do some cleaning here. Some close-ups of the texture examples. Sure thing. Except for the one that just got lost. So, yeah, basically I categorized my tools into, I think, like 5 categories, and then went through the process of what they're able to accomplish. Not in totality, because I'm always finding new ways of, new techniques for shifting the tool in some way or another, or, you use one type of technique and then another one gives you a different result than if you do them in the opposite order. So yeah, it's a constant exploration, and it's really fun. It's one of my favorite mediums. I love sculpting, but carving foam is just, it's almost like a relaxing sort of, it's relaxing because the kind of tools that you can use are so mundane, easily available, and mostly far less dangerous than, woodworking tools and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, you can still hurt yourself real good. And I have, but. Parallel to each other. Yes, that is the word I was looking for. Now, one of the advantages that I have with the particular environment that I'm working on, if you're setting this up for wargaming, this needs to look beautiful from 360 degrees. But because these pillars are set into a wall, like so, I really only have to worry about 3 sides. So I do a quick evaluation. I say, okay, what's the ugliest side, or the side that's going to take the longest to make pretty? And I just make sure that's the back. Yeah. Kind of been going for the, you can also see there's a slight difference in width between the neck here versus here. And that's because, again, imperfect, not completely parallel. But I like the profile better, to have the thinner neck to the fatter body. So I tend to choose one of these angles as the front. This is a very sort of, ruined type of place. So having some amount of variety, I think, is actually totally fine. By the time you get all the cracks and weathering and stuff like that on there, no one will ever be able to tell that, there's a couple millimeter difference in the width of these things. A Z series X-Acto blade be preferred? Oh, that's a great question. And to be honest, I'm not sure exactly what that means. I know there's a lot of different blades. I have quite a collection, but I've never paid attention to the names. I just look at the shapes. This is kind of like the universal does most things perfectly well blade, but I appreciate that thought, and I should look into it. A lot of it depends on the particular shapes that you're trying to accomplish. And trying to find, yeah, so I kind of marked this as my front. See, that's vaguely an F up there. An F made of cracks. And this is also pretty pedantic, what I'm doing right now as far as going in and recutting out all of these lines. Given that they're going to be, again, in context, you're going to have a massive colossus in the front. These are probably going to be completely blurred out in the background for virtually everything. But it's one of those things where during the photo and video shoot, I want to have as much creative freedom to swing the camera around, um, and get whatever angle I want. And I would hate to be limited by, oh wow, this shot looks perfect, except this one pillar is there and it just has a terrible, really cheap looking face that's facing the camera. So, yeah. So in other words, in order to maximize the flexibility, what I'm doing, I'm sinking way more time into it than is probably necessary. But again, I put well over 1,000 hours into this project already, so it kind of feels like proportionately it's fine. The diorama that I'm building for the Colossus is about the size of a bathroom. It's 6 feet by 8 feet uh, wide and long, and then 6 feet tall. Um, And just to complicate my life even further, because I think it'll be worth it, the entire thing is on a Lazy Susan spinner device. And the reason I'm doing that is so that I can have this camera stationary and just rotate the room to get even more dynamic sort of flyby type of shots. Okay, that's my front. There are also places, so the illusion that I'm trying to create here is that this is a block, a piece of stone that was cut. This is another piece of stone that was cut, probably from the similar quarry. Who knows? But they're not going to be identical as far as surface properties or chemical composition. All these things that kind of affect the way a stone weathers and takes damage. And so I have all this kind of uh, environmental storytelling, I'll call it, kind of going on in the back of my head. And that usually pushes me to go the extra mile when it comes to getting all the detail, even though it's a little, often a lot excessive at times. I tend to overthink my environments, probably because, like I said, my day job as a video game environment artist and designer, I'm often looking for ways to add a more robust experience, a sense of verisimilitude to the environments. Yeah, I definitely admire Weta Workshop and their dedication to quality and detail and authenticity and stuff like that. That's very right up my alley. And yeah, they call their miniatures bigatures because often their miniatures are the size of a room or like a significant portion of the soundstage. All right, for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to say, okay, that's good enough for this piece for now. Now I'm going to show some of the fun carving and other techniques. I really actually like, so this sort of Ripley surface, you can make that out, right? Yeah. This Ripley-ish surface is from pushing it through the hot wire, and the wire sort of, has slightly different speeds as it like catches on more dense parts of the foam or something. I don't know. Whatever the cause, it ends up with this Ripley thing, which actually, uh, to me, gives the impression that this stone was quarried and was sawed, by a large saw of some sort, which is how they often legitimately cut stone at quarries. Even in oldie times, they had some pretty incredible industrial equipment, powered by hand or animals or um, water wheels, etc. So I kind of want to keep this. I just like that look. Um, the the thing that I absolutely adore about XPS foam is the fact that when it so you can slice it, right, and cut it into these nice angles, but you can also dig your blade in and then pull, and that chips it. And when it chips in very rock-like ways. The crystalline structure or whatever that composes it must be similar enough to most kinds of stone to give it that property. And here's another example of, you know, because I'm trying to create the illusion that these are two different blocks, when this chips in like this and it just like, you can see that little edge, it's like, no, there should still be a little bit of a gap here. So I always go that extra mile to continue that illusion as I go. This is another place where the illusion breaks down because you have this nice straight kind of shelf and then it goes up like that where, again, where the wire was cutting it um, in a less than ideal way. Oh, wow. I want to go to that convention. I miss conventions so much. Yeah, painting parallax maps would be really nice for miniature work. And height maps and um, procedural grunge maps. All that stuff would be very handy. But there's also something that's, I don't know, it takes me back. I actually started um, making video games professionally in 1995, if you can believe it. Um, and so I've been through a lot of iterations of how game art is created, going back to like D-Paint back in the day. The first game I actually worked on was a full motion video game where I was sculpting rat puppets that were created to go on top of remote control cars, and they would drive the little rats around. It's really weird, and it got canceled naturally. If you get into the video game industry, it's almost a rule that your first game has to be canceled. Anyway, yeah. So the process for making the art for environment stuff for video games, well, characters, almost anything, has changed quite a bit over the years. And carving foam kind of takes me back to the early days where you have to think about like every pixel, more or less. A series of saws that the Romans used to make marble slabs. Yeah, yeah, those are so cool. I did get paid for working on that game that got canceled. Yes, very little because I was an intern at the shop that was that was doing it. But hey, it was something. It was a start. All right. Here's my most fun thing to do, and that's the shatter technique. So that's how I get this kind of look. And again, because this foam, whatever magical property it has, it just feels like rock when you smash it. This is a just a rubber mallet. It's got these exchangeable heads, and it came with 4 heads. So I was like, hey, why not take advantage of that and carve them in different shapes and stuff. So when I'm doing my smashing, it's doing a you know, not a perfectly round sort of hammerhead look. And then the rubber versus the plastic gives you a little bit of a different look as well. The angle that you hit it at. All of these things you can vary up your the look. As well as I like to collect little rocks that I find that make excellent sort of divotty textures. But the other cool thing is that you can use it sort of as a battering ram? I don't know. You, you can use it to do some good smashing if you're into that sort of thing. Okay, and sometimes this will happen, and because it usually it has the skin that holds it on, that is very unrock-like. I now have a choice. I can pull it off and have this big chunk removed from the side, or I can just kind of, you know, push it back in, and now I have this big cool crack. And I don't know. I'm gonna sit with it for a while I do some other stuff. After you get these initial sort of compound fractures, I like to go in with the X-Acto and start saying, okay, so a spiderweb crack would start appearing and go off in this, that, or the other direction. One of the things I'm trying to figure out how to do is to minimize the look that this is caused by an impact, because right now this very much looks like, you know, someone hurled a boulder at this pillar and hit it. And that's not really so much the story that I'm trying to tell. I'm trying to tell the story of an ancient, you know, ruins underground. You know, it's got plenty of, there's a big hole in the roof, so there's plenty of moisture, water running around and through the rocks and stuff like that. But it's not a place where rocks get thrown around regularly. So, if this were like a battlefield sort of prop, then it would be totally in bounds to do that sort of thing. But again, trying to tell a particular story about this environment, which means I'm going to naturally go towards some techniques and away from others. Hierapolis Sawmill. Cool. I'm definitely going to check that out because I'm endlessly fascinated by that sort of thing. Like, it's amazing how clever people have been with, you know, the limited technology they have, like the diagonal water screw used for pumps, you know, that where you could drain swamps and stuff by having a giant screw rotating that just like pulls the water up along its shaft as it goes. So I've got a Got the trash truck just outside. Yeah, so anyway, I'm gonna just kind of let that area rest in my brain parts while I go on to other things. And you know, I'm realizing my camera is just like a little closer than it needs to be. The traditional rolled foil technique is great. The thing that I tried not to do is roll it over everything equally, because again, I'm trying to give this idea that some of these rocks have a slightly different chemical composition than the others and are going to erode and weather in different ways. So I'll kind of pick some out and say, this is the especially whatever this texture is. This is kind of a, I haven't come up with a name for it, but I do have a name for this one. This is sandstone. So I made this tool by taking an old paintbrush, I covered it with epoxy, and then dipped that in some decorative sand. And then after that set, I coated that all with super glue and made two different tips so that I have the ability to go in and say, just this rock right here, not that rock, not that rock, just this one is the sandstone-y type of rock. And then this is, what is this? This is some kind of a pottery type of tool, but I've made several of these myself simply by taking a bunch of wires and gluing them together more or less. But I like this for giving a pitted type of look. And I'm trying to not be overly regular with it. I want it to be somewhat irregular. I want some bigger pits, some areas where the pits are much deeper and bigger, and then other areas where it kind of fades off a little bit. Again, going back to reference, I've created these reference sheets of a variety of stone types, right? So when I'm working on one and I want to say, I want this one to be flat, I've got something to look at. You know, it's amazing that you still have ruins that have been sitting around for hundreds of years that have like absolutely laser cut precise edges. It's just good to remind yourself of that fact. You know, another really interesting thing about most old buildings, castles, ruins and stuff is how they're usually built up over, you know, hundreds of years. Parts of them burn down, are destroyed, just fall over, and are reinforced with new rocks from different places, or scavenged from the old ones, or resurfaced. So you always get a lot of like just variegated surface properties of all different types. That doesn't apply so much to this particular project I'm working on because it very much looks like this was some kind of arena. I'm just going to call it an arena, like an underground arena that was all built in at one time in one place. Oh yeah. Syrian banknote, huh? Hi, AJ Baki. Garthor, welcome. All right. So here I have three rocks that have subtly, very subtly different surface properties. It's not super, am I as focused as I can be? It's so hard to film this stuff because it's so light. It's hard to capture all the shadows and stuff appropriately, but once we get the paint slapped on there, it'll become pretty clear. So I want to do something basically to break up these three. Not that you should never have three blocks together that are similar, but for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to go through and I'm going to say this one has some particular structural flaws to it that are causing it to crack and break down significantly. And I'm kind of purposefully tilting my blade as I go. You know, it's getting duller the more I use it. So in some parts it slices, and then at some point it starts to catch and tear. And I'm totally down with that. I'm just letting it kind of do its thing and pulling out the parts as they start to suggest themselves as interesting shapes. It's also a good opportunity to go in and super reinforce my idea that this is a separate block by just carving in really deep and pulling out a bit like so. Let's see, Pindrake TG. What to what ore are you referring when you say it had an image of a huge water wheel on it? All right, another really fun thing. Let's see, I'm trying to think where to put it. I'm gonna put it up here. This is one of my favorite techniques, is to go in and slice a thin little bit like so, and then just grab that edge and peel it and tear it. And that gives kind of a slatey kind of wear and tear look to it. You could go the other direction as well. The Syrian banknote does. Okay, cool. Is that a modern currency that you're referring to? I assume, because I don't think they had banknotes back in ancient days. Although I'd be happy to be corrected on that. All right, other ways to get interesting surface effects is just kind of scraping the blade along until it catches, and then just kind of pull it out. Try not to be too, again, I don't want to be really regular with it. I want some areas to be very much this flavor and then it to kind of taper off. Going back to reference, you see that often when you're looking at blocks like this one right here. It's really corroded and pitted and falling apart right there, but over here it's pretty much intact. All right, let's scoot along to the next step. We'll say that's enough carving for now. I'm gonna move over to my Jug-O Mod Podge. And I don't like having stuff all over my hands, so I do a lot of glove work. This foam started as a 2-inch by like 4 feet by 8 feet. Um, I know it's available in, I've seen 4 inches, which, oh, I'd love to get my hands on some of that, but they do not have that locally where I live. They also have, you know, depending on where you live, there's different colors of it, which have slightly different properties. There's, apparently in Europe, they have way different, well, okay, not way different, but the the ability for it to take impressions, you know, when you roll your thing over, it's just like takes it way better than this stuff, which has a little bit of rebound to it. So you can only get so much detail using impression techniques like this. By the way, this is another tool that I made the same as this. I just took a little bit of pipe, wrapped it in Propoxy 20 is the kind of, it's like steel stick, or, you know, well, I guess you could say it's like green stuff, but for industrial purposes. All right, so I have this Juggo Mod Podge that is essentially it's straight up Mod Podge with a shot of the pigment that is used in latex house paint. I went to the hardware store and I said, if I buy a can of black paint, can you not give me the latex part and just give me the stuff that comes out of the machine that gets mixed into it that makes it black, you know? And for whatever reason, that was apparently a huge logistical challenge for them to figure out how to do that. But eventually they did. He ended up just giving it to me for free, which was great. But I like that doing that as opposed to mixing it with black paint, which is what a lot of crafters do. When you mix it with the black paint, you're losing, you know, however much paint gets mixed in, you're losing the properties of the Mod Podge, which is giving it that hard protective shell coating. Which requires that you have to put on more of it, and the more you put on, the more you're kind of burying your detail, because, you know, the paint has a certain amount of thickness, the Mod Podge has a certain amount of thickness, so you can easily kind of obliterate all the fine detail work you've done, or a portion of it. But the more it is just the Mod Podge, you're just getting that protective thing. And so now that I'm going over it, I do feel like so it's bulging out on this side, which I'm just not happy with. It doesn't look like rock to me. I'm going to see what happens if I pull out one chunk of it, like so. Now I'm using this really cheap, just garbage house brush for the main application process. It's just a workhorse. You really don't need anything fancy for this part. What I do get fancy, you'll see in a minute here, is I want to get rid of the brush strokes that this brush leaves behind. You know, this is great as far as the speed of application, but it's not great in that it leaves a bunch of giant brush strokes. Oh, thanks, Pendrake TG. I'll definitely check that out. I have several books on ancient inventions, you know, surprising ancient inventions, you know, the batteries that they found from, was it Mesopotamia? Um, you know, Greek fire, and that screw pump that I mentioned. Yeah, and my favorite artist is Leonardo da Vinci, just because he was so like in tune to like just trying to imagine what could be done. He didn't necessarily have all the materials available, you know, at the time to accomplish what he was envisioning, but you know, it pushed the envelope enough for people to kind of take off from there. So that's really cool. All right, so now that I have this basic layer on, I use this. I believe this is a makeup applicator for base or foundation or something, and I just tap, 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 and that obliterates the brush strokes. That's right, Nisha. Woo! The show is going to be incredibly varied. Just a heads up, I do a ton of different kinds of stuff, so for the next while, it's probably going to be pretty focused on this kind of terrain slash diorama stuff as I'm working on this massive diorama. But there will be points where I'm also doing sculpting and painting and whatever else. Okay, so now we've got that pretty much applied, and the next step would be to apply a just a base coat of gray on top of that, which I believe I have here. Boop. So yeah, I went through and I pre-loaded several of these to be at the different stages, cooking show style, so that I could just pop from one technique to the next. Trying to decide if I want to clean off my gloves. Here's a weird like thing that I like to do is just kind of go with the messiness of the process. So I've got some paint on my table here, right? I've got some paint on my fingertips, but and you know, if I lay this down and I'm doing stuff, it's gonna get, oh look, it's got a blotch on there. But oftentimes that ends up giving you happy accidents, and you can just kind of roll with it. I feel like that happens more often than it ruining things. Obviously, if I was working on, you know, a Gundam model or something, it would be a different story. You know, everything has to be perfect. But for ruins and more like fantasy or post-apocalyptic, like those kind of genres, just having the randomness occur as you're working is often really great. Okay, so right, gray primer base, not primer, like just paint, straight up gray paint that I got from, I got these massive jugs of it. Let's see exactly what it is, shall we? Is that Sax? S-A-X? Probably. True Flow. Heavy bodied acrylic. This is, yes, very heavy. This is blockout white. So it's super duper thick stuff. And you'll notice there's a little bit of modeling, color variegation going on there. And that's because when I applied the gray, I went through again with one of these and I left on the dark from the brush before, right, from the coat before, which means, again, it's giving me a little bit of randomness to it, which I'm a fan of. So the next step would be going the next lighter gray up. So I'm gonna, which I believe I have some still sitting around in here. So I'm just using the same brush, which is gonna darken it down a little bit. And again, that's great. I want variation in here. I'm not going for 100% coverage. I'm going for like, I don't know, 80, 70 or 80% coverage, because I want some of that modeling to show through a bit. With the last coat, I was going for about 90% coverage. You can still see some of the black and the cracks and stuff, but very little of that. Yeah, I don't know if there is another product that is quite exactly like Mod Podge. I mean, it's so close to just being white glue, essentially, you know, PVA glue, but there's something about it that gives it slightly different properties. You know, I've coated stuff in PVA glue before. I feel like PVA tends to bubble and pool more than Mod Podge does. So whatever that slight different ingredient or formulation is, it does make a difference. Now that you mention it, I'm really thinking a Reaper John hot tub show would be pretty cool. Happy accidents when you cough too hard. Yeah. I have this thing where, for whatever reason, doesn't matter the season, doesn't matter what I've been exposed to that day, I always have to sneeze twice a day. It's just like a rule for my life. Josh's 2 rules for life. Sneeze twice a day. Yeah, and so it often happens while I'm painting. Just like, and it comes out of nowhere. That's the other thing. It's not like a gentle buildup, or I'm like, oh, I'm about to sneeze, let me prepare. No, it's just like, bah! All right. So that essentially takes me to where I'm at my next step, which is this. Okay, so I've done that. That is dried. Now I'm on to, here's the thing. Sometimes I will go to a more dry brushy technique. I should also note that to me, dry brush is a spectrum. It's not a step. So as I'm going, like when I do my first gray coat, you could technically call it a dry brush, even though it's covering 90-95%, because I'm not trying to fill everything, right? And then this last one I did to about 80%, also a dry brush, mostly. So at this point, I'm like, okay, now I'm thinking more, I'm kind of swinging the other direction to maybe 30% coverage is what I want to get at this point. Let me grab my lighter. Yeah, so I mixed up a light base gray and a dark base gray. So now I'm ready for the light stuff. Bunch of times a year you get one hiccup. I feel like I have not had the hiccups in a really long time, and I wonder why. Such a lucky thing. Hiccups are awful. But if you only get one, that's not so bad. pretty close to what I've got here. So I think I'm going to mix a little more white into it. No, actually, I take that back. I'm not. First, I'm going to apply it and see, because often things are not exactly as they appear. Oh, you know what? Oh, I almost had my plan backwards. Okay, I'm sorry. I already did this part on. I wanted to show how I do my staining techniques for water stains and stuff. Let's look at our cool reference here. So I've got carve, color, stains. Here we go. Yeah, because I have so many kind of flat-ish surfaces, I look to this kind of thing to see what I can get. You know, you can kind of see how the water runs and stuff like that. And then there's also these really big differences between surfaces that are faced slightly up versus those that are completely flat versus those that have a bit of underhang, which tend to catch and hold the moisture longer, which builds up more mold or stains or chemical deposits or whatever it is that's causing the discolorization. Let's go with that. So this is how I do my staining. I start with water that has a drop of dish soap in it, and then I add black to it. And I do that in 2 different cups. One that has quite a bit more black and one that has just a little bit. So this slightly less black, it goes on in a way that looks pretty starkly black, but by the time it dries, this is going to be as subtle as that. This I mostly use as my guide. Where I want the drips to flow, I'll do with this lighter. And then I take the darker and I get a little more specific with it. And when you do wet first and then you apply it, you get a much more kind of graduated and naturalistic stain. The thing that I try to avoid is this, where you just put on a line and you let it, you put on enough so that it drips. This to me is the worst thing, is to get a perfectly drip width line going down. Nothing gives away scale to me quite as much as seeing that particular width of line, because it's just like, yep, I know, I've seen lots of water drips in my life. I know exactly how wide they are. And when you see that on a miniature, it's just like, it just gives away the scale. So try not to do that. Yeah, I use the physical paper out here because the tablet that I had as a reference, you know the story of planned obsolescence, right? It was a victim of that. Also, having to manhandle any piece of equipment, electronic equipment, when you're dealing with this at the same time, it's just stressful. All right, so I usually end up wetting most of the surface to some extent with the very watery one. And I try to be pretty random about it. It's hard to get truly random. Your brain is just a heuristic creating machine. It's always looking for patterns and always wants to revert to recreating a pattern that you already know well. And part of making things naturalistic is fighting those impulses to just redo the same pattern over and over again. And that in itself is kind of a skill that you can build up over time. I'm still not excellent at it, but I've gotten better over the years. When I look at my older work, I can definitely pick out the patterns. Let's see. And this kind of thing, right, where it like shoots off at an angle because I was holding it this way when it goes, that's another great reason for using this watered down version first, which is, again, going to be so subtle you're not really going to see it very well. But then after I have that wet path down, I can go in sometimes with a smaller brush, add my darker, and then it's just make sure I'm holding it upright and I get the better stain. And so here's another example where it's just like, yeah, does that make sense? It almost looks like marbling there, which, you know, isn't too bad, but I don't know. Let's find out if we can work with that. This might be one of those cool happy accidents where I'm like, ooh, here's a new technique that I can utilize. I'm guessing it's one of those things where I'll want to do it in multiple coats, right? So I let this dry and then I'd go in with another pass and then blend that in as much or as little as I want. I have very little control over how I'm blending this because it's wet on wet. So it's just gonna spread how it spreads. Exactly, thousands of drips over time. Yeah, actually I got a really good blood stain effect on this guy. Doing a similar thing. This is a sculpture I made for a band for a promotional thing. We made a limited run of 100 of them, but yeah, just letting it run and then waiting for that to dry, letting a mostly translucent run and then kind of guiding it over, you know, several um, sessions. Let's call them sessions. Okay. Yeah, I'm actually really kind of digging how that marbling streak is going there. I may have to experiment, and by may have to, I mean I'm definitely going to experiment with using some different colors in there, you know, getting some blues or lighter, like even using whites and stuff to complement that. See if that goes anywhere. That's pretty interesting. And you can see how I had an entire black stripe going down there, and it's pretty subdued at this point. Oh God, please do not swallow as much as you can of a spoonful of peanut butter. That sounds like a easy trip to the ER right there. Even though these tops are not going to be seen, I still like to give them a little bit of love. You know, it's there. I got the paint. Why not? You think it looks like a crack, Pindrake? This part? Oh no, I accidentally... So I put water here to drip down there, but then I rotated this way, which caused the drip to go down and follow that kind of established line. Although I gotta say, it's still not bad. Yeah, I'm gonna keep toying with this. This concoction is water with a drop of dish detergent and a couple drops of black acrylic paint. And I have a thicker mix, which has, you know, a lot more black paint, and this one that has just a little bit of the black paint. This is another thing that is always a dead giveaway of scale, is these kind of U-shaped, you know, if the drop terminates and starts drying like that, it's not something I've ever seen in my reference. This drip actually ended up kind of okay to me because it starts out a little bit wider and it gets thinner as it goes down. Although this little bulge at the bottom, again, is kind of a scale giveaway. So I'm using my mostly watered down mix to give it a little more noise, like visual noise. So you're not going to pull out the that drip look quite as much. Another thing that you'll notice in reference of ruins a lot is incredibly dark patches, you know, pretty darn light next to almost pure black. And that is hard to, for me, it's like almost difficult emotionally to handle laying it down that way. And I don't know what it is. Like, it feels wrong. But then when you look at it in situ, like on the diorama, on the wargaming table, whatever, it usually ends up looking right and good. But when I'm making it, it seems wrong and bad. So I don't know how to describe that, but it's a continual internal struggle, as all art should be. Let's see, I think I'm actually gonna just coat this entire cracked side just because I really want to make sure those cracks get a little bit of dark love. I'm going in with my thicker black where I want stains to really travel. Yeah. And this is, you know, 200 to 300% darker than it's going to be after the water dries. Yeah. There's another naughty drip. Do not like. But this kind of modeling that's going on up here, love that. That's great. Feels like, you know, either just natural sort of variegation within the rock tone itself, or lichen that's grown on the rock. Now this, uh-oh, do I have a hair in there? What's going on? A hair or a crack? Huh. I don't know what caused that little thing, but I don't like it. What happens if I just blacken over it? Yeah, I'm kind of like, so this is actually pulling some of the pigment off of the surface with it to, you know, and runneled it down. But it left this really interesting lighter streak with a darker streak. Yeah, I dig that. It's pretty cool. Reality is unrealistic theme. Yeah, one of the funniest things in game development that you run into is you'll see this in sometimes in creature design. One of the funniest stories to me is in Guild Wars 2, when we launched, we had a tree. What was it called? based on a real tree that has its bark is like green and red and yellow with like streaks of black. And we got a bug back twice from the QA department saying, you know, there seems to be a texture problem with this tree. It's like, no, that's what these trees look like. It's like, well, yeah, it's a strange thing where like sometimes if you do what is realistic, it comes off as less realistic, and vice versa. This is actually a problem in sound design as well. Like we're so used to what things sound like in movies, especially things that aren't everyday occurrences, right? Like punching, for instance. You know, everyone knows what a punch sounds like, but that's not what punches sound like at all. That's what it sounds like when you like slap a piece of leather against a watermelon or whatever their, you know, Foley technique is. All right, one final drippy drip on this guy, and then I think we'll go to our final step, which is a dry brush. Okay. Again, I'm just gonna leave that there. I like it. It's weird, but I like it. All right, let's do a dry brush. So one thing that I found is that a couple notes on dry brushing. One is never use white, almost never use white. Two is, well, really, the rule is that the brighter the differences in contrast between the paint you're dry brushing and what it's going over, the greater the difference is, the more lightly you need to do the dry brushing. Number two is if every area is special, meaning like every corner and edge and detail is highlighted, then no area is special. It just kind of becomes visual noise at that point, in my opinion. It's a stylized thing. It's been done so much in you know, wargaming terrain that it's almost kind of an expected stylistic thing. In my personal work, I'm aiming towards realism rather than stylized. You know, I can't get to realism, but that's what I'm aiming for. And so when I'm doing my dry brushing, again, I'm looking at reference and being like, okay, what are the highlights? What's really standing out in these things? And very rarely will you see a white line around the edges of things. Trying to find, I have an example of like real world, what looks like you know, someone came by with a dry brush. And so, okay, these corners right here, for whatever reason, especially that one, you can see it is consistently lighter up and down the whole thing. That is unusual, but it's cool that it does exist. You can kind of see it along the edge of here. So my point is that I try to be subtle with it and not overdo it. That's my only point. All right, and I should have white somewhere around here. So I'm going to start with the base gray that I already applied on there. Also, I'm skipping a step of color variegation on the rocks. Ideally, I would go in and I would add a slight hue variance, you know, a little bit of reddish, a little bit of bluish, whatever, to some of these stones. It's not actually reflected. Whoa, that was more than I intended. It's not actually reflected in the game. The game is super monochromatic. But I'm trying to, again, push for realism more than absolute adherence to the source material. Okay, so I'm just kind of pulling in white till I get to a tone that I think is about what I'm aiming for. Just eyeballing it. At this point, again, because there's so much variation in there, having a specific ratio isn't really helpful. because it changes depending on what you're painting over. How you playing at Crossroads? The bald eagles cry. Yeah, yeah. Which is, I believe, usually a red-tailed hawk or something. We have one of those hawks in our neighborhood, and from time to time, as we're out on a walk, oh, this one's already been highlighted. It's like, it'll do its thing, and I always feel like, you know, I'm in an epic movie traveling across the desert. Red-tailed hawk. Yep, that's the one. Paired with the visual of an eagle. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I'm just going in and I'm very gently kissing areas and deciding I can always go back and add more. And if I get too heavy-handed with it, you know, before it sets, I can smear it around to give it some more fade. And I'm kind of doing it between the dark streaks. Yeah, it doesn't need to be a one-to-one exact thing, but I'm trying not to mess with the stain drip effect. You always want to kiss your work as often as possible. Just subtle kisses, butterfly kisses. See, I'm willing to go over some of the dark spots here and there, but when I do, it's with a very light touch. And I'm purposefully going way more subtle than I'm going to have it done finally, but this is more like an exploration pass of where I feel like it's most beneficial to the overall read of the piece. And I think if there's one thing to take away from dry brushing, it's that. Like, the point of dry brushing is to help you visually parse what you are looking at and for it to feel satisfying as a representation of that thing. And sometimes that means heavy dry brushing, sometimes it means light dry brushing, sometimes it means no dry brushing. And in general, having it highlighted at the top and kind of fading down as it goes down, that's you're never going to go wrong doing that technique. Unless it's a pillar that sometimes you're going to have upside down. And even then, it's not wrong. GDV Minis, hey ya. Oh, nice. Clock Tower. My most, second most infamous video game work. For those who don't know, the Mad King's Clock Tower is a Halloween level that comes out, you know, during the Halloween content of Guild Wars 2, and I designed it as a, you know, a giant clock tower, and it spins, and you have to like jump around the side as a, you know, spooky fog rises up under you. It was kind of like the original Fall Guys. It was Fall Guys before there was Fall Guys. And then at the end, you have to like jump in through the clock tower face and smash through the stained glass, and you get your treasure at the top. But it's particularly harrowing. All right, I think at this point it's like I'm kind of re-going over certain areas a couple times. And so I'm just going to go until the brush is almost completely exhausted. Like the vast majority of the paint is out of it. And then I feel like I can go over and hit most of the surface. And the amount of paint that it's leaving behind doing that is so subtle that, except when it's not. This is not the ideal dry brushing brush. I just have it on hand. That it's probably going to end up what I'm aiming for. Yeah, I'm jumping puzzles. Yeah, I apologize. I take full responsibility for them. You gotta understand though, I worked on Guild Wars 1 games for like 5 years or something straight. And when we got the ability to jump, it was just like, you know, freedom! So, you know, I overdid it. Alright. So I think we're pretty much at our place we're at here. Another thing that I'm going to do further on these, I'm probably going to go back and color some of these rocks a little bit subtly different, as well as do a different, like I'll spray them down with a sealer that's fairly matte, and then again I'll choose some of the rocks and put like a satin finish on them, because that's the way rocks be. Some of them are just shinier than others. But yeah, I think that's a good place to call it for today, for our first stream of this new show. So let's see. I'm supposed to tell John that, hey, let's start looking for a cool raid. And in the meantime, I'm gonna talk up my other stuff. You can follow me personally on pretty much every medium. Instagram, I'm Breath of Life Dev, and Facebook. On Twitter, I'm Joshua Foreman. On oh yeah, look, they're above, they're on the top of the frame. If you need to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me. I also stream on my own channel on Wednesday nights and Sundays. And I have a YouTube channel where I'm doing more and more of this kind of mini terrain stuff lately. I also have a ton of stuff on like sculpting, you know, modding things, like modding my Baby Yoda and my Pip-Boy collector's edition, blah blah. You know, just general crafty stuff. Got lots of that. Yeah, I'm really liking all the interesting shapes that the paint mixed with water is giving me there. I'm a fan of that. So yeah, that's where we're at. So on the next episode, I think we're going to be doing more similar stuff over here. Let's look at this stuff. So we're going to be doing some of these massive ruins that we've got. We need to be incorporating them with that mountain back there, which is like it's kind of the edge of the arena where it blends into the ceiling. That thing is going to be inverted. Yeah, so just lots more applications of this basic technique in lots of different iterations. Oh, I'm catching my wire. Again, super pro. Well, we're just gonna have to deal with it apparently. What is it about changing one little thing that makes everything break? I don't know. It's like magic. Any questions, comments, follow-ups while we're getting ready to raid? Throw them at me. Hit me. I'm ready. My body is ready. I think this guy is actually ready to stain. The new book is indeed out, Fat Peanut. Thanks for asking. It's on Amazon right now, called The Scarred King 2. Besides all that other stuff, I also write novels with my co-author set in our unique fantasy world. They're pretty fun fantasy adventure romps. I mean, I like them, and if I like them, I don't know why anyone else wouldn't. So, particular knife I recommend. Honestly, so this is the one that I use 90% of the time. It's just a generic X-Acto knife, X-Acto blade. I went to a secondhand store and just bought a collection of them. I have a knife sharpener, which I just run them through from time to time. And yeah, there's ain't nothing special about it. The only thing I would recommend is not using the family, kitchen knives. Not that the foam would hurt them in any way, really, but it does dull them pretty quickly. That's what had the banknote on it. Okay, thank you for that follow-up. Huh. Or, sorry, that's what the banknote had on it, not... That'd be weird if there was a banknote on... what is it? A Norius? Wheels of Pots. You can catch me streaming on my own channel Wednesday nights, Pacific time at about 6 p.m., Sunday afternoons at about 12 or 1 p.m., all Pacific. And then, assuming everything went well and I didn't just get fired, I'll be here every Thursday, same time, 2 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Pacific. I don't know. I think this was fun. I enjoyed it. I always enjoy meeting new people, hearing new things. All right, we're wrapped up, John, ready to go. You can pop on over whenever you say so. There's nothing I need to do on my end, right? You literally just like flip the switch and I get electrocuted and drop through the trapdoor. Yeah, Francis. Thank you. All right, we're gonna be checking out Chipotle. Shipuchi? Shipochai? Sipoki? Oh boy, this is going to be exciting. I can't wait to find out how that's said. Right the first time. Of course I was. All right. Have we done the raid? Are we raiding now? We'll get this technical stuff figured out eventually, don't worry.